Jester carried the curse of being able to read between the lines. It meant that he wasn't able to reach that blessed, silent state of mind he really needed to fall into to do his job. At first, Umbral left the words super soldier out of the briefings. After all, it just wouldn't do for one of Umbral's elite teams to worry about their potential replacements. But Umbral was hitting a wall and gleaning just scraps of information with each mission. They needed more, something more substantial. And for that, Ares would have to be in the loop. At this point, the Special Operations team knew the end goal of most of their recent missions. One of the prototypes, Raptor, walked among them. Jester was surprised to realize that he wasn't bothered when he first discovered that Umbral was actively trying to invent human war machines. Extreme strength, durability, and speed were never going to make up for smarts. As Jester looked around at the rest of his team, he once more concluded that he was the brain of this operation. Not that the others were dumb, not even the increasingly dense sniper. But Jester's cockiness wasn't just an act of a way to cover up the rampant mental issues that were actively trying to pound down the doors of his mind. He really believed that he was extraordinary. It all had to do with the way he saw the world. The delicate and intricate ways that everything connected and moved. Understanding how his environment was built and how it functioned made it much easier to blow it all to dust. When the orders came down that Ares was being deployed to the Ural Mountains in Russia to investigate a subterranean abandoned Volga outpost, Jester felt a thrill. The last time they had been underground, it would have been some sort of diplomatic incident to blow the thing to rubble. Man-made tunnels and caverns under the Ural Mountains, on the other hand, were fair game. And such a breath of fresh air from the never-ending parade of buildings, labs, armories, and whatever else he was tasked with tearing apart. Lately, Ares felt to him like a wound that might not be healed, but had at least been stitched up somewhat over the past month. Raptor's harsh edges after his return hadn't exactly softened, but he knew that he got better results from the rest of the team if he kept them under wraps. Aegis was still in the doghouse for the Genesis incident with Sentinel, Raptor, and Hawkeye, but it was impossible for any of them to hate their medic forever. Jester thought it was stupid they had held onto their fury with her as long as they did. Not much sense in pissing off the one person qualified to dig a bullet out of you if need be. Tempest, on the other hand, was the perfect combination of aloof and violent. She essentially got no blowback from being Aegis's right hand in getting the kid out. For a minute, it looked like she and Hawkeye were going to have to beat the hell out of each other just to get it out of their systems. But even those two had more or less mellowed out. Well, their working relationship had mellowed out. Hawkeye on his own was still devastatingly effective at his job, and after whatever chip Umbral had given had been removed, it seemed like he would go back to a silent, hulking shadow. For the most part, that was true, but he was still holding on to some odd sort of paranoia, not in the field, but out of it. Jester caught him sometimes watching the robot like a frightened dog, whale-eyed and hackles up. All in all, though, they were functioning, not at each other's throats and cohesive. It was good enough to let Jester overlook that Umbral was sending them out to find the genetic pieces for their Frankenstein replacements. Sentinel had briefed them about their mission on the way over, and it was fairly straightforward. Infiltrate the abandoned underground Krater research station in the Ural Mountains, recover critical research from their super soldier program, and secure control of a thermal energy source that had been used to power the research station. Umbral believes that the thermal energy source has a lot more potential than what it was being used for. Umbral never got what they really wanted from the Project Genesis mission, but the immense amount of data they had been able to retrieve from the facility had given them the location of Krater Station. It seemed to be the second arm of the rival megacorporation's genetic engineering program. For Genesis, the goal had been manipulating the human brain to do the impossible. At Krater Underground Research Station, they focused on gene editing, using the thermal power source to work under the radar and create the strongest warriors possible. It seemed that Krater Station had been inactive for years, and there was no available information about what caused it to be abandoned. All of Umbral's preliminary investigations suggest that it's no longer being used for its intended purpose. Still, there had to be something down there keeping Volga from reclaiming their site right away. Of course, there were a few signs of life. Why else would they send Ares in? Ares was flown by private plane most of the way, where they boarded a chopper and were dropped off a little more than a mile from the entrance to the station's old service tunnels. The hike in had been quiet, just the sounds of their boots on the loose stones of the ground. The mountains were covered in scrub trees and short grass, but as they ascended, the greenery stopped, and all that was left was hard-packed snow and stone. They could see the entrance to the service tunnels now in the evening light, camouflaged to match the mountainside, but faded after so many years of disuse. It was cold, but the wind wasn't biting yet, and Jester took a moment to take in the view. The sun was sinking into the horizon, the sky lit up like the flames of a burning building. An omen, maybe for the amount of destruction they were about to cause. Ares didn't have any delusions that the door would be easy to open, but they had a two-part plan. Part 1, Exo. Part 2, Jester. Normally, he would be a little annoyed that the robot got the first shot at glory, but Jester knew that he was about to have plenty of work to attend to once they began their descent into Krater Station. So, when they reached the rusted, thick metal doorway, Jester stepped back as Sentinel motioned Exo forward. He still couldn't say he was crazy about the robot, but it had proved capable at the worst of times, and handy at the best. Exo grasped the door in both of his mechanical hands, stakes shooting from the bottom of his feet and anchoring him in place. The robot braced himself and started to pull. It took a good amount of effort, the rusty metal screeching and scraping, but Exo did it. He wrenched the door free and threw it away. A puff of stale air followed, dust motes floating in the air. It was pitch black inside. Sentinel cracked a flare to life and threw it into the darkness, revealing what appeared to be a relatively intact tunnel. It had a bit of debris, but none of it looked caved in. A promising start. "I want Raptor, Exo, and Tempest on point," Sentinel started. "Shoot to incapacitate non-hostile humans, and shoot to kill for all other hostiles." The team was all business now, and they moved like clockwork. It was easy when the orders were so straightforward, but they all knew the job was never as easy as it appeared on paper. Jester felt his blood pumping, his fingers itching. He was so damn sick of boats and labs and spiders and monkeys, aliens and all the other ridiculous things and places that Umbral sent them. This was the sort of work he was used to, the sort of work that he loved. The tunnel was wide enough to allow a small vehicle, so they walked 3 by 3, leaving Jester with the stunningly awkward duo of Hawkeye and Aegis with him. Sentinel covered the back. "We're coming up to the first checkpoint. There's a room up ahead that looks like it was some sort of security point," Tempest called from up ahead. "Hold," Sentinel ordered, and Ares came to a halt. "Exo, check the room." "Roger that, Commander," the robot replied. Jester always found the thing's voice slightly jarring, but he'd gotten used to the flat tones. The robot strode ahead and into the room, his headlamp casting a faint glow on the walls. After a minute, he struck his head back out and said, "All clear." Sentinel nodded and led the way inside. Jester followed. The room had obviously been some sort of security post, with a desk in the middle and monitors on the walls. The screens were cracked, some of them busted. A chair was on its side. The team took a few minutes to scour the area for any useful information. "Anything?" Sentinel asked. "Nothing of immediate value," Exo answered. "Wait," Aegis interjected, shining her headlamp on what looked like an enormous framed poster on the wall. It was gray with grime, but when she ran a gloved thumb over it, a swath of white was revealed. "Sentinel, you said this was a research station, right? As in Van Station?" "Yes." The commander was already moving towards the medic. "Then why does this map show a city?" They were all quiet, as Aegis used an old, discarded jacket to wipe the map clean. Once it was done, the silence stretched longer and longer. No one wanted to speak, because that would mean they were all seeing the same thing, and it was real. Finally, Sentinel spoke. "It's less a city and more a settlement. But yes, I think we've underestimated the scope of this operation." "So, what do we do?" Raptor asked, eyes flicking over the map. "We're already deep enough underground that communications are iffy." Sentinel sighed heavily and looked up at the map. "We secure the objective. We find thermal energy sources and eliminate any hostile factors. Then we get the hell out of here and let Umbral handle the rest." Jester wasn't surprised. "Sounds like nothing's changed." "You're damned right." Sentinel turned and nodded towards the door. "Let's get it done." No one said a word, but they didn't really have to. So what if the scope had changed? Ares had secured bigger areas than this before. It was always a shock to the system when a job that should have taken a few hours turns into something that might take an entire day, though. They walk in silence for some time, everyone quietly checking over their own kits and preparing for the task ahead. According to the briefing, the thermal power source should still be providing electricity to parts of the research station. But so far, all they've seen are busted bulbs and dark screens. Finally, they reach the end of the tunnel, another set of huge metal doors blocking their way through. Once bright warning labels are faded in the light of their headlamps, just scraps of angry red, yellow, and oranges. To the left of the door was a steel ladder that climbed the wall before disappearing into a dark tunnel, presumably leading to the second level of the station. Exo approached the door's terminal, a cracked and faded thing, and when he laid his mechanical fingers on it, the keypad surprised them all by glowing with a dim backlight. It's all the confirmation they needed. The place is still powered. "Up or down, boss?" Jester asks, and he can feel the scalding look Sentinel is giving him through his dark visor. "Try again." "Up and down, sir." Sentinel takes a moment to consider their options, turning to the robot. "Exo, can you provide us with a 3D rendering of the research station using the map we saw back at the security station, and layer it with the map we were given by Umbral?" "Yes, Commander." "Good. Now add our position on the map and the entrance to the facility." It takes no time. The interfaces on their wrists pinging as they receive the new map layout. Jester pulls it up on his visor, impressed. It was like looking at a 3D version of the map from earlier, but with a much more detailed layout. The two leaders confer for a moment, and then Raptor speaks. "We'll go up. It looks like there is an extensive set of walkways that should give us a superior view of the settlement, assuming they are still intact." "Acknowledged. I will lead the way." "No," Sentinel corrected. Hawkeye will lead the way. You and I will cover our 6, and I'll be the last one to climb. Yes, Sentinel. There was a strange sort of balancing act with Exo that everyone seemed to be struggling with. So far, he had been an asset, if a creepy one at times, but it was both all too easy and impossible at the same time to view him as a member of the team. Jester struggled to work it out in his mind. When they were working, especially when they were fighting, Exo moved and fought among them like he had been born to the job. It was effortless, and Jester often found himself forgetting that the man-shaped machine battling at his side wasn't a person. In his peripheral, guns blazing, his brain kept assigning Exo the label, part of Ares. Even in the calmer times, when they were strategizing, Exo would chime in with helpful information or invaluable tools, like 3D rendered maps. He slipped in and out of conversation so easily that his voice, flat and with a mechanical edge, but clearly created to sound as human as possible, had just become part of the din that was Ares. And Jester didn't really like that. From the beginning, he had thought that one of the perks of having the robot on the team was that he would be the perfect bullet sponge in case of an emergency. A sacrifice that would fight to the bitter end so Ares could escape if needed, but one that wouldn't hold any emotional weight. Exo was the one sent into dangerous areas to check for gas leaks, hidden enemies, or deadly environmental hazards. If the robot exploded from the heat of a volcano, Jester wouldn't even have blinked when he first joined their ranks. But now it was different. They knew Exo's worth, or at least they had grown comfortable having him around. Sentinel had ordered them to be silent until they reached the higher levels of the compound, and Jester was more than happy to oblige. He had no desire to make small talk at the moment, too occupied with his own thoughts. When he looked back over his shoulder, he saw Exo walking silently behind him, and for a split second his brain said, "Part of Ares," again. Letting Exo eat a bullet or 10 to save their skin would be simple, but at what point does the pendulum swing in the other direction? How hard should Ares fight to avoid that situation? They could easily avoid a firefight by sending Exo to do the dirty work and be destroyed in the process. But what if they ran into an advanced security system or impossible to bypass the firewall, and didn't even have their walking metal hacker? Umbral would be less than thrilled if they lost Exo to enemy hands. The more he thought about that point, the more uneasy he was. Where did his value lie in comparison to Exo's value on Umbral's scale? State-of-the-art robotic electronic warfare specialist, or squishy human demolition specialist? Jester didn't want to consider the thought too much. Maybe it was better if he never knew which one of them Umbral would have saved from a burning building if there was only one option. But he understood why Sentinel would be the last one up, and Hawkeye the first. Ares would undoubtedly need Exo inside the facility, so Hawkeye, the one with the quickest reflexes, and Sentinel, the leader, would lead and bring up the rear. Valuable, but emotionally worthless Exo had to be protected for the success of the mission. Jester? Aegis' voice was low, and she leaned over trying to get in his line of sight. "You alright?" "Fine," he lied. "Just thinking." She didn't look convinced, but she let it drop. Aegis shouldered her rifle and began the climb up the ladder. Hand over hand, from the semi-darkness to the service tunnel to the pitch blackness of the enclosed portion. Above her, the lights of her already ascended teammates bobbed, stars in a midnight sky. At the top, Hawkeye and Tempest waited, Aegis's boots hit the metal catwalk, and she brought her rifle back into her hands. She got her first good look at Krater Station. There was indeed electricity. Dim yellow lights dotted here and there, illuminating patches of the darkness like islands. The station felt both claustrophobic and expansive. Every sound seemed to echo, amplified in the oppressive space. The distant drip of water, the creak of failing infrastructure, and the whisper of movement from unseen things lurking in the shadows. Above, the cavern's ceiling is barely visible, swallowed by darkness, but the occasional faint glow of malfunctioning light fixtures overhead revealed its tremendous scale. It was enough for her to see structures of crumbling concrete and twisted steel, thick power conduits spreading out across the cavern walls like veins. The faint hum of machinery could be heard in the distance. No doubt the geothermal power station. The concrete pathways between the buildings are littered with debris, and there is the mildewy stench that comes from these sort of man-made underground structures. Water pooling where it was never meant to, moss growing to fill the empty voids. To the left, a collapsed tunnel entrance was half buried, a dark chasm that might have once led deeper into the facility, but now seems like a death trap. It was the corners and edges of the place that were the most degraded. Piles of rubble along the walls showed that without maintenance, the cavern was starting to cave in. Every sound seemed to echo. The distant drop of water, the muffled creak of the failing infrastructure, and then the eerie sound of something moving down below. It could be rats, or it could be something more sinister. "Look!" Tempest hissed, pointing to a narrow alley between two of the crumbling facilities. The structures were crammed together as closely as possible to maximize the space. It was going to be difficult to maneuver. "There, right there!" They all snapped in her direction, watching a flicker of movement in the distance, fast and nimble, darting between the buildings. "Stay close. Weapons ready," Sentinel ordered. They moved forward cautiously, scanning their surroundings for any signs of danger. They knew stealth was not an option. Between their lights and the sounds of their footsteps and voices echoing throughout the massive facility. They had emerged near the center of the cavern. The buildings below were more intact than those back at the entrance to the settlement, which seemed to be in the oldest and most deteriorated part of the cavern. Here, there were still signs of habitation, from rusty carts filled with discarded clothing to scattered crates and tools that had long been abandoned. There it was again, a figure moving just at the edge of the shadows. From their vantage point on the catwalk, it was hard to see details so far below. Aegis felt the smallest pull of fear at the idea of descending down into the mess. But that was what they were there to do. So they would. There was no way to be silent on the catwalk, and it groaned under the weight of the team, the slight sway of it making her uneasy. They had the best view possible of the station, but being on the walkway also made them vulnerable, exposed. Aegis could feel eyes on her somewhere in the darkness. They moved along the edge of the cavern, across a narrow bridge connected to another crumbling building, the shadows here so dark that she couldn't even see the metal supports of their pathway. Ares moved towards the far left-hand corner where the map indicated a stairway would lead them to the ground level. She wasn't afraid of the dark. She was a soldier, trained to operate in all kinds of environments. She was used to the shadows. But this darkness felt different, heavy, and with the lingering feeling of something lurking in the unseen places. When they reached the staircase, Sentinel motioned for Hawkeye to find a place to position himself, leaving him behind on the higher level. The sniper left quickly, without a word. They descended into the unknown of the lower level, kicking up dust as their boots hit the ground. In the corner of her visor, a dot of red light flashed on a simplified version of the map, their destination. It wasn't going to be easy. Volga had clearly tried to bring this place down before they abandoned it, evident by the missing doors and the collapsed sections of tunnels and buildings. No one had ever been meant to return here. Ares marched down the desolate street, hands on their rifles. Twisted metal loomed above them like teeth in a slack mouth, but they were all heartened when a gruff voice came over the comms.
"I'm in position."
"Copy," Sentinel replied. It was hard not to look into the different structures they passed. Aegis was fascinated by the idea that this hadn't just been a research station, but a place where people lived, shut away from the warmth of the sun. Krater Research Station wasn't big enough to be a town, but the signs of long-term habitation were there. When the street opened up into what might have served as a central gathering area, Sentinel motioned for the team to stop with a raised fist. There was movement, distorted figures flickering in and out of sight between the ruins.
"Eyes up,"
the Major said quietly. "Spread out." They positioned themselves into an oval, making sure no one's back was undefended, then crept closer. She narrowed her eyes, watching the flickering of the shapes as they scurried about. There was an eerie whistling noise, she realized, being made by whatever was moving, like an infant's cry or a bird's shriek, but so abysmally distorted that it chilled the blood in her veins. Then, one of the figures stopped and seemed to draw itself up straight. In the hazy light, its figure was still distinct, humanoid, as it skulked towards them. Its limbs were elongated, moving with a stilted grace that told the medic this creature, this person, had been twisted like this its entire life. Cautiously, they shifted position, Sentinel and Raptor closest to the oncoming figure.
"Hold your fire,"
Sentinel said, but didn't lower his rifle. "Let's see what we're dealing with." Aegis tapped on her wrist interface, her HUD lighting up with the heat signatures in front of her.
"I've got readings. 5 besides the visible one, so 6 by my count." "Confirmed,"
Hawkeye added. The limited information from her HUD was enough for Aegis to make a determination. Bipedal, bright heat signatures. She knew what these figures were.
"They're human. The super soldiers, I'd imagine. Or at least what's left of them."